Hello everybody, this is Ralph Martin from RJ Quality Consulting. In this video, I want to continue my series on covering all of the clause elements of the ISO IEC 17025 standard. In today's video, I am covering Clause 5 of the standard, which covers the structural requirements. And if you missed the first video, which covered Clause 4, general requirements, you can always just subscribe to my YouTube channel, and you'll see that I have a series covering Clauses 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8. I am actually walking you through every clause element of the standard, and I'm dedicating a single video for each of the clause elements. And also in the YouTube video description, you'll see my full blog post on ISO 17025 clauses, where I fully describe all of the clause elements of the standard, and each one of these videos will be on that blog post, so you can also view it there. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get started with Clause 5 of the ISO IEC 17025 2017 version of the standard. So the structural requirements really are, as what I like to do on all of these videos is recap with you what the documentation requirements are to meet the requirements of this particular clause if your lab is trying to get ready for an external audit from a ISO 17025 assessor, or if you are looking to get your lab ready for that type of accreditation. I think these videos will really help you understand not only the clause elements of the standard, to understand the requirements, but also to understand documentation-wise what you need in order to do well in an audit. And I will summarize those at the end of each video. And as we go along, I'll let you know what the expected documentation requirements are for the meeting of those requirements. Clause 5, a lot of documentation requirements can actually be embedded into your quality manual under the appropriate section. I highly recommend having a quality manual that is in alignment with the same clause structure as the standard. So in particularly Clause 5, most of your documentation requirements can simply reside in your Section 5 of your quality manual, and I'll cover those as we go. What we'll do in this video is cover all of the subclauses in detail, and I'll show you how to align your lab with the requirements. So let's go ahead and get started to the next slide. As an introduction to Clause 5, the purpose really is to ensure that the lab operates under a stable, impartial, and competent structure. The Clause 5 actually outlines how a laboratory should be structured to ensure impartiality, consistency, and competent operations. And this clause applies to all labs, regardless of size or ownership or how many people are in the lab. I know as a certified auditor, I oftentimes hear from labs, well, we're a pretty small lab, this doesn't really apply to us. That's nonsense. So this applies to all labs. It doesn't say in the standard only big labs or anything like that. This applies to all labs, regardless of size or ownership, and is the foundation for meeting the rest of the standard. So the overall structural requirements in Clause 5, there are literally 6 subclauses, which includes subclauses 5.1 through 5.6, which really covers your legal identity, the organizational structure, roles and responsibility, and the communication of those roles and responsibility and other things. Like I said, there are 6 parts to Clause 5, from legal identity to internal communication, and each piece of this supports a different aspect of good governance. So let's walk through each of these subclause elements one at a time. So subclause element 5.1 is all about legal identity. the lab must be a legal entity or part of one. So a lab can be an independent lab, or it could be a lab that supports manufacturing efforts for a larger company, or it could be an independent laboratory that supports or is part of a larger organization. Either way, the lab must be legally responsible for its testing or calibration activities. And so an example of objective evidence that you would need in an audit might be, say, a business registration or an incorporation certificate. If you're an LLC, it might be your business license. The auditor is going to look for some sort of proof of the fact that you are a legal entity. So clause 5.1 requires that the laboratory be a legal entity. This means that you must either be, like I said, a standalone legalized legal organization or clearly be a part of one that is larger. This ensures accountability and traceability, and you'll need, like I said, documentation such as a business registration to show this compliance. That would be an example of documentation requirements. Clause 5.2 is really the identification of management. This is where the laboratory must define the roles, responsibility individuals for, number one, the management system itself, and how the management system is going to ensure compliance to the ISO 17025 standard. This must be formally assigned. So clause 5.2 ensures that management responsibilities are formally assigned. Someone must be in charge of the management system and the overall laboratory operations, and must show that they are committed to the compliance of ISO 17025. And you can assign these responsibilities to one person or divide them up, but they must be clearly defined. And a lot of this documentation, again, can be inputted into your quality manual under section 5.2. That's what I recommend. I recommend, again, a quality manual that is aligned with this same clause structure, because at the end of the day, all ISO programs are all about say what you do and then do what you say, and then have objective evidence that proves you do what you say you do. So if you keep that in mind, that is what your quality manual under these appropriate subsections would say. They would say how you meet the requirements of section 5.2, and the objective evidence would be objective evidence for that. So again, what we want to do is we'll move on to section 5.3, which is the organizational structure. This is where we must define and structure the laboratory to include management, technical personnel, and support roles. And I recommend having some sort of organizational chart to do this. That organizational chart can be embedded into a quality manual, or it can be referenced from a quality manual and be a separate document. It's really up to you as a laboratory how you want to do that. But I highly recommend some sort of organizational chart, and it's perfectly okay to put that and embed that in a quality manual. So here, what I'm going to show you on the next slide is an example of a documented organizational structure. It's very simple. It's kind of dumb looking, but it gives the overall structure of requirements, and you can modify this type of item any way you see fit. So here it is, like I said, very simple. You have, say, a laboratory director, and the reporting to the laboratory director would be the quality manager, maybe an admin support, and a technical manager. And then reporting to the quality manager might be somebody like a quality analyst to help the quality manager. And then reporting to the technical manager is maybe a laboratory analyst. So what you'll notice in this structure is that the quality manager and technical manager are independent of each other. In order to safeguard impartiality, for example, you don't want the quality manager reporting to the technical manager, for example. That would not be an organization that would be structured to safeguard impartiality. But you'll notice in this structure, the technical manager and the quality manager report to the laboratory director. So if there's any disputes between the quality manager and the technical manager runs the lab, quality manager runs quality, then it would be up to the laboratory director to, make any necessary decisions that would impact what, say, the quality manager wants to do and what the technical manager wants to do. This is an example of a laboratory that's structured to safeguard impartiality. Um, and we did cover impartiality in my video on the clause 4. So if you want to go back and watch that video, feel free to do that. We get into some of the documentation requirements for that as well. So then what we'll do is move on to clause 5.4. This is avoiding conflicts of interest. We talked about that a little bit. So again, you want to be structured to safeguard impartiality to prevent influence on results. So examples of this are to have separate roles, somebody in charge of laboratory operations, somebody in charge of quality management that would offer no client pressure or anything like that that might be a hindrance to the safeguard of impartiality. So again, 5.4 focuses on this impartiality. The lab must be structured to avoid conflicts of interest. And for example, the same person shouldn't be responsible for testing and sales, for example. And clients should not be able to influence the results. Impartiality declarations and structural separations can help there. And again, we covered that in the video on clause 4, and where we talked about an impartiality policy and a confidentiality policy signed by the employees, and then also any contractors that might visit the lab. Again, you can go back to that video and watch that. Then we'll go into clause 5, which is really all about responsibility and authority. So everyone in the lab needs to know what they're responsible for and have the authority to act for that, whatever they're responsible for. Shown here is a responsibility matrix. It's very simplistic. The lab director handles operations. The quality manager ensures QMS, quality management system compliance, and the technical manager supervises technical staff and equipment. This level of clarity is essential during audits. So again, it's something that you can put into the quality manual. You can have a roles and responsibility table, something as simple as this. Defining the responsibilities. These are just examples. So you would, take your major laboratory management responsibilities, put them in a table, and then, embed that into your quality manual. This would be an example of what you can do that would meet the documentation requirements for section clause 5.5. And again, you can put this right in your quality manual under the appropriate section 5.5. Again, say what you do what you say, objective evidence proving that you do what you say you do. You'll probably hear me say that a few times. I want to drill that. As a certified auditor, this is what we are auditing, and if you don't have the documentation to support this, you will get a nonconformance. So moving on to clause 5.6, which is all about communication. Clause 5.6 reminds us that internal communication is key. Your lab needs to make sure all staff are aware of their roles and that what their contributions are to the quality management system. Any updates and regular meetings help with this. Documented communications through email and training can help meet this requirement. So you want to ensure that this effective internal communication happens. Another way that laboratories use their quality manual is that they require all employees to read the quality manual, and that is the way they communicate the quality management system to their personnel. That is one way, and then what they'll do is they'll sign some sort of training record agreeing that they have read and understood the quality manual. That would be documented evidence that you meet those communication requirements as stipulated in section 5.6 of the standard. So the staff must know their role in the quality. They must also understand the quality objectives of the organization. Now, quality objectives are introduced here in Clause 5.6 of the standard, but we get more into detail when we get into Clause 8 of the standard, where we talk specifically about quality objectives and where they can appropriately be documented, which in most laboratories, a good place to document quality objectives would be within management review meeting minutes, and we'll get to that in Clause 8. So if you're following this video series, you will get introduced to that and what that looks like. But this is a good way to get employees to understand the quality management system is by having them read the quality manual and sign off on that. And you can also have meetings, trainings, emails to continually educate the personnel on the quality management system and laboratory operations as well. So we'll move on to slide 11, which is Clause 5, compliance best practices. I'm kind of reviewing here, summarizing. You want to maintain an updated organization chart. Like I said, you can either point to your organization's chart from your quality manual and have a separate document, or embed your organizational chart within your quality manual. You want to use job descriptions, which we'll get to more in detail in Clause 6, specifically 6.2. And you want to review that there are no conflicts of interest within the management system, and then conduct regular staff meetings. So these are best practices that can help ensure that you're compliant and audit ready, especially when it comes to Clause 5. Update your org chart as needed, define job roles, and conduct impartial reviews, and communicate regularly with your team via those sources such as email, reading the quality manual, signing off on that, and all of those things I mentioned before. Then we're going to get into like an overview of the documentation examples that you would need to meet for the requirements specifically for Clause 5. An organizational chart, a responsibilities matrix of some sort, legal documentation to prove that you are a legal entity as a laboratory or part of a bigger organization, impartiality declarations, and then management memos or proof that employees have signed off on the quality manual, emails, things like that. So these are just some examples of the documentation that would help you meet the requirements of Clause 5. Like I said, most of these documentation requirements can be put right into your quality manual in Clause 5. I can't emphasize that it's better to do that than to have maintain separate documents that are really more work for the laboratory to maintain your document control management system. But if you have everything in your quality manual, that will be your objective evidence, and it's right there. I could tell you right now, ISO 17025 assessors like a quality manual. They like when the laboratory has a quality manual that's structured to the clause elements of the standard, because it makes their job easier. And if you have a happy auditor, you are less likely to get nonconformities. So I highly recommend you get a quality manual aligned with the clause structure of the standard. So, kind of common nonconformities within Clause 5, missing an organizational structure, having unclear responsibilities, no impartial safeguards, and poor communication. These are some of the common nonconformities that auditors will give for Clause 5. So what's next in the series? Clause 6, resource requirements, is what I'll be covering, so stay tuned for the next video. I'll cover all of Clause 6. Clause 6 is a much beefier clause. There's a lot more detail in it, so the video may be a little longer. This one's ran a little longer than I expected as it is. I think you should go ahead and subscribe to my YouTube channel, get any updates when I come out with these videos, and they definitely give you value. And you might also, in the description box of this video, I do offer a free internal audit checklist that covers all the clause elements of the ISO 17025 standard. You can download that for free, and you can also check out my document templates. I have a link for those. If you are looking to meet all the documentation requirements for the ISO 17025 standard, I have written a complete template that covers everything you need to be document ready for an ISO 17025 audit. We have quality manual template that includes all of the clause elements of the standard, a description of all the required policies and procedures, and then I also have a set of documents where you can get all of the required policies, procedures, forms, everything you need from a documentation standpoint to meet all the requirements of the standard. If you're interested in that, I have a really good price on that. It's $49 for the quality manual, and then an upgrade $49 for all of the required policies and procedures and forms you need to implement that. So for a total of $98, you get all of the documentation requirements for ISO IEC 17025, the 2017 version of the standard. And as a bonus, you get email access to me to help you implement. So that is it for today. This is Ralph Martin signing out. You make it a great day.